I am, of course, very excited to have Marc Siegel as our guest this evening. He flew in from New York just yesterday, so I feel even more honored that he's with us tonight. Initially, this event was supposed to happen in July, as some of us might know, as the first talk within the program, but unfortunately, it had to be postponed, which is not so bad now because it's many people now, but I'm even more curious that now, rather at the end of the program, we address the question, why gossip? And first of all, I'd like to tell you a little bit about why Marc Siegel. So Marc was an important inspiration in the project cycle, and his writing about gossip and its counter-narratives was an actual part of the reading I did with students who participated in the workshops I did. He is a professor of film studies at the Johannes Gutenberg University in Mainz, and his focus is on experimental film and gender and queer studies. And besides that, he is also working as a curator, like he just did as the curator of a talk program at Silent Green in Berlin, within the framework of the exhibition, The Garden Cinematics of the Soil. And among other events, he also curated the festival, the publication and exhibition project Edit Film Culture, as well as Camp Anti-Camp, a queer guide to everyday life. He is also a member of the Academy of the Arts of the World in Cologne and a co-founder of the artist collective Cheap. Also, he will publish a book together with Duke University Press under the title A Gossip of Images, which you will get a first idea about with this talk, which is amazing. So therefore, I want to give you a very short introduction on the approach of my curatorial program and give you an idea about why we meet in this constellation and about the conceptual framework behind it. So what I wanted to highlight within my program was, first of all, the omnipresence and the invisibility of gossip. Also, I wanted to point out that gossip actually went viral even before the first hashtag circulated in social media. So, however, this is nothing timeless, but it's a concept with the historical and political connotations. And to give you some background information, the English word gossip originally referred to a close friend. And it was only with the advent of modernity that its meaning was changed to specifically denigrate solidarity among women as unserious gossip. And as Silvia Federici points out, women could thus be oppressed and their labor power used for free in the emerging capitalism. At home, beyond the sphere marked out as public and governed by men. So what I want to say is that gossip might seem banal, but just this banality is powerful. It's ephemeral, networked, and never fully tangible. But this also makes so-called counterpublics possible, which are used by feminist, queer, and marginalized groups as a form of empowerment. And this is exactly what Marc is addressing with his research, starting with the period of AIDS and queer subcultures in the late 80s and early 90s in the US. And what I find interesting, though, is that Marc not only refers to the work of feminist and queer literary scholars and philosophical reflections on gossip and rumor, or just the fact that gossip is ephemeral, intimate, or invisible, but he also explores how this ephemerality is produced in and with images. So before Marc will start, I need to give you some practical information, of course. This talk, as you might have noticed, will be recorded and afterwards uploaded on our YouTube channel and can be watched there afterwards. So if you don't want to be seen or not be uploaded as well, please just turn off your camera. But if not, of course, it's always nice to see some familiar faces, and I'm happy to see you when you turn on your camera. Then when Marc is talking, you might know that it's a commonplace now, please mute your microphones that we don't have any background noise. And yeah, Marc, again, I'm very, very happy that you're here and that you're with us tonight. And I will hand over the virtual microphone to you now. And yeah, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Agnieszka. Thank you also for bearing with me when I had to cancel because of my spontaneously secured coronavirus vaccine. And I was just completely fertig on the day when I was supposed to give the talk. So I'm really happy that we get to do it, that I'm able to come back and that you're hosting me here tonight. Thank you so much for that. It's nice to see some familiar names, if not faces yet. And I look forward to discussing this with you. What I'm interested, and also I should say I'm very happy, I'll say in German, ich freue mich auch, wenn wir auf Deutsch diskutieren können nachher. Meine wissenschaftliche Schreibsprache ist Englisch und deswegen werde ich auf Englisch präsentieren, aber ich bin sehr offen und interessiert daran, mit euch zu diskutieren und gerne dann auf Deutsch, wenn gewollt. Good. Yeah, so what I'd like to do is introduce some of my perspectives on gossip today, some of which may be familiar to those of you who've been reading some things I've published with Agnieszka, but I'm also going to present some stuff I haven't published yet that are part of this book manuscript I'm currently revising for Duke University Press, called A Gossip of Images. As I realized when I was preparing this today, I may not satisfy Agnieszka enough by dealing so explicitly with images, but it may remain somewhat suggestive how I am thinking of gossip as a means of circulating images, but I hope it's suggestive enough that then we could follow that up in the discussion. It just is as a result of where I am right now working on the manuscript that I decided to just focus on this one section. But maybe just to introduce the project for you, I'll just read about what the whole project is about. So in the book, A Gossip of Images, I theorize the dynamic process of speculating about and embellishing Hollywood star images in queer counterpublics as a form of gossip. To make this argument, I analyze select examples of films, videos, performances, paintings, literature, and criticism, as well as the incidental and indiscreet remark in an interview or at a conference. Gossip, I argue, is not simply a means of oral communication, but rather a speculative logic of thought, opposite to cinema and central to the construction of identity and intimacy in queer counterpublics. I treat gossip as a performative means of transforming one's relationship to the self and one's intimates through the circulation of speculations about others. So I have somewhat a utopian vision of gossip, which I think is maybe coming through and will come through. I do deal with the negative affects that are also circulated along with gossip, but my focus is still on emphasizing the productivity of gossip. So that's a very strong perspective that I'm representing here, because I still feel that it's not sufficiently has not sufficiently been theorized. Moreover, I take seriously the etymological link of the word speculation to the Latin specula and speciare, so as to emphasize the possibilities visualized through the intimate exchange of conjecture about others. I suggest that the speculative function of gossip is to enhance, embellish, and expand images of others, be they personal acquaintances or Hollywood stars, so as to generate unique images that are gossip's own. Hence my decision to coin the term gossip image. I'm not a big fan of coining terms, but it somehow just came organically here. Although the book certainly has historical implications, its main concern is in providing a theorization of gossip as a mode of image circulation, so as to clarify the productivity of a queer investment in Hollywood star images. My examples from the history of predominantly US-American queer filmmaking and film criticism focus roughly on the period dating from the underground film movement in the 1960s through the queer cinema of the 1990s. And I've organized the book according to different aspects of a theory of gossip: circulation, belief, details, and fabulation. Those are the four main chapters: indiscrete circulation, lensable belief, the promise of a detail, and fabulous types. What I'll be presenting today is our excerpts from the introduction that I'm currently working on. A book titled The Gossip of Images begs a number of questions. Foremost among them, what is gossip? What is meant by image? What is a gossip of images? Or perhaps, who is a gossip of images? And of course, what does it mean to bring together gossip and images in this way? Why speak of a gossip of images and not gossip about images or gossip with images? The answers to these questions, as I hope I will show throughout this book, are intertwined. In the English language, gossip is both a noun and a verb. The noun gossip describes both a thing, the questionable content discussed among confidants, and a person, the one who circulates this content. A gossip spreads gossip. But gossiping is also what a gossip does. The gossip gossips. Gossip is therefore both subject, object, and action. The action of gossiping plays a significant mediating role between the subject and the object. Indeed, as popular wisdom would have it, or our own experience, the experience of many of us, by spreading gossip, gossip risks becoming gossiped about themselves. The gossiper, we could say, travels along with the gossip, is part of the gossip. Gossiping is thus an action in the sense that we say, oh, Mark told me that, I tell Agnieszka, hey, did you hear that so-and-so is having sex with so-and-so? And then Agnieszka, and I say, but don't tell anyone. And Agnieszka then, of course, goes to Ulrika Boskamp and says, hey, did you hear that so-and-so is having sex with so-and-so? And Ulrika Boskamp says, oh, Agnieszka, who did you hear that from? And Agnieszka, oh, from Mark. And she said, oh, well, Mark, oh, I heard that Mark was. And so in that sense, the person who passes on the gossip then travels along also as an object of gossip. Gossiping is thus an action that can easily turn the subject into an object. In gossiping about others, one knows that one runs the risk of being gossiped about oneself. And thus the chain of transformation between subject and object, between first person and third person, is to some extent willfully set in motion. As for the question, who is a gossip of images? The answer for my project is simple. They are and we are. Part of my argument is that the various filmmakers, performers, spectators, and critics I discuss in the pages that follow are indeed explicitly or implicitly gossips. I am thus particularly interested in that chatty aspect of their work in which they babble on about the stars they adore and their socially, sexually, or emotionally transgressive moments. Through collective speculation about Hollywood stars and other compelling figures, these gossips not only circulate old images, but generate new ones. And that's why I argue that gossip is not simply a parasitic practice of vicariously living out one's dreams and hopes through the speculations about images of others. Instead, gossip's speculative function is to enhance, embellish, and expand these images of others so as to generate unique images that are gossip's own, as I've said already, indeed, gossip images. Moreover, I argue that gossip functions as a logic of thought that informs much of queer culture. What I don't do in the book is offer a history of gossip. It really is more a theoretical a theory of gossip with historical implications. And for me, as Agnieszka already mentioned, the key kind of historical moment for me in thinking about gossip and beginning to understand gossip and its role in queer culture was this moment in the late 80s, early 90s, the development of queer activism, of queer theory, of the concept of queer itself, and AIDS activism. And that was the moment it was both a moment that was incredibly formative for me personally, and also one in which I came to understand more clearly how the recirculation of images, of words, of concepts can lead to the construction of, or the construction of subcultures and countercultures, and how this fundamental process and what kind of a role gossip plays in this fundamental process. I remember, for instance, at the it was the anniversary party, like for the first year of ACT UP Los Angeles, the AIDS activists group in Los Angeles, and there was a huge party, and on the wall, when you walked into the party, there was a huge sheet, like white Bettlaken on the wall, where it had some statement like, I didn't know they were queer. And then there was just people, there was an edding, and people can just write down whatever. It was often at that point stars or celebrities, politicians. And it was just this huge list that, as you could imagine, became quite hilarious and contradictory and everything. But you see in that moment how this kind of this sort of power that one felt in claiming the queerness of others for the self. And it was in this moment that Douglas Crimp, important AIDS activist and art critic and theorist, wrote an essay about the emergence of queer activism out of AIDS activism. And here I quote from Douglas Crimp about gossip from this essay called "Right On, Girlfriend." "The most fundamental need gossip has served for queers is that of the construction and reconstruction of our identities. Most of us can remember the first time we heard someone called a queer or a fag or a dyke, and that someone not being ourselves, nevertheless responding within. So that's what I am." Because the name calling is most often a derogation, our identifications are also self-derogations. We painstakingly emerge from these self-derogations through new identifications, a process that often depends on gossip among ourselves. Really, he's gay, she's a dyke, Jody's a dyke, then maybe I'm fabulous too. And the Jody, of course, is Jodie Foster, who Crimp is referring to here, who's kind of sort of came out a little while ago as a lesbian, but at that time was in no way publicly known as a lesbian, but was counter-publicly known as a lesbian. And so Crimp is referring to a poster campaign, an activist poster campaign that was outing Jodie Foster. By invoking gossip's formative role in the construction of queer identities, Crimp underscores the fundamental instability, or better, provisionality of these very identities. Just as gossip about the sexuality of movie stars doesn't offer us a fixed truth about their sexual identity, so does our gossip about ourselves fail to secure the truth of our identities. It really doesn't matter to most of us if she, he, they, or Jody really is a dyke. The possibility that they might be suffices as confirmation that we might be as well. In taking on the speculations as descriptive of some aspects of ourselves, we test them against our own experiences and desires, and in the process elaborate upon and transform them in the gossip we circulate. Then maybe I'm fabulous too. But what do we make of Crimp's shift from gay and dyke to fabulous? He doesn't write that in circulating speculations about the queer sexuality of others, we declare, then maybe I'm gay too, or then maybe I'm a dyke too. Instead, he suggests tentatively, I should say to be, if I'm calling lesbians dykes, then maybe I'm a fag too. I'm following Crimp's language here. Instead, he suggests tentatively that maybe, just maybe, I'm fabulous too. I'd like to take Crimp's speculative speech act, maybe I'm fabulous too, as partially expressive of the function of gossip in the construction of queer identities and histories. In doing so, I'm reading Crimp's shift from gay and lesbian to fabulous as a shift from an empirically knowable sexual identity to a discursively constructed one. That is, by keeping knowledge about sexual practices and identity in discursive play, a particular queer kind of gossip solicits not the certainty of someone's sexual identity, their gay or lesbianness, but the fabulousness of its or any other non-normative possibility. And as I mentioned already, my final chapter in the book is called Fabulous Types, where I work with the concept of fabulation as articulated by Gilles Deleuze, further specified by Tavia Nyong'o in his book Afrofabulations, and also Saadia Hartman in her work as the concept of critical fabulation. So I'm working with this concept of fabulation as a way of describing the narrative constructions of gossip. And I'd like to shift now to another section of this introduction. And here I begin with a quote by Virginia Woolf. "But this is all dubious gossip, and, says Mr. Murray, uninteresting. But there I do not agree with him, for I should have liked to have had even more of dubious gossip, so that I might have found out or made up some image of this melancholy lady who loved wandering in the fields and thinking about unusual things, and scorned so rashly, so unwisely, quote, the dull manage of the servile house," end quote. Gossip may have been denigrated by particular male critics in Virginia Woolf's time as dubious and uninteresting, but for Woolf, it remained a necessary tool for excavating a history of women writers. Existing accounts of writers excluded details about those melancholy ladies whose fantasies led them to question and resist their subjection within the servile house. Many of us in Woolf's wake have also relied on gossip to generate and circulate images of defiance, images of resistors to heteronormative social standards. Like Woolf, we who trade in dubious gossip do so without confirmation of the facticity of the information we circulate, or even the desire for it, without the desire for such confirmation. Nevertheless, we remain convinced of the creative possibilities enabled by proliferating such indiscreet and unconfirmed speculations. For gossip is often the only source of information, however dubious, to which one can turn in order to find out or make up images of those whose lives don't accommodate themselves so tidily to official histories. Gossip is, however, not simply a source of counterpublic information. It is, of course, also a staple of our contemporary culture. With magazines, talk show and entertainment shows, websites, newspaper columns, Tumblrs, blogs, Twitter, other social media, gossip is, if not an official, then certainly an extremely popular and ever-present mode of circulating information about public entertainment and political figures. Typically, as Martha Geaver has noted, the permeation of public and political life by gossip is greeted by journalists with skepticism. Geaver observes that many journalistic accounts cite gossip as, quote, a common denominator of the era's public era, end quote, at the same time as they criticize the era's vapidity. In a compelling and extended earlier consideration of gossip from a variety of critical perspectives, and earlier I'm speaking now about a study by Patricia Mellencamp from the early 90s, a feminist film and media studies scholar from the United States. Mellencamp distinguishes among different kinds of talk in the mass media. Reacting to the expansion of entertainment magazines and television talk shows throughout the 80s and early 90s, she separates out for praise, quote, a therapeutic gossip of enunciation, end quote, in which daytime talk show guests, typically women, speak directly in the first person to primarily female audiences about the details of their emotional lives. She contrasts this kind of gossip with, quote, personal or mediated gossip, which is dependent on absent people as objects, end quote. According to Mellencamp, such gossip depends only on the announced, the absent, the gossiped about. For her, the phenomenon of talk about the private details of absent others, whether in small groups or in the mass media, may be of scholarly interest, but is socially and politically questionable. Such a gossip of the announced, according to Mellencamp, condemns women to speak indirectly about others and not directly about themselves. With these distinctions between a gossip of enunciation and a gossip of the announced, Mellencamp attempts not only to sort out and categorize the layers of talk in contemporary society, but also to alter to alter our understanding of a typically undervalued popular genre, namely daytime talk shows that feature confessional female guests. She characterizes this kind of mass-mediated talk as, quote, the electronic syndicated version of consciousness-raising groups of the women's movement, end quote. Although Mellencamp's distinctions may initially help us to sort through the layers of talk in contemporary mediated society, her characterization of personal or small group gossip as secondhand talk is, to my mind, a bit short-sighted. In a certain sense, it links her analysis with those condemnatory journalistic accounts cited by Giever that blame gossip for the vapidity of contemporary culture. I will address Mellencamp's contentions in further detail below, but before doing so, I would like to introduce some distinctions about gossip made even earlier than Mellencamp by the feminist literary scholar Patricia Meyer-Spaks in her, for studies of gossip, let's say, pioneering book, if you will, or path-breaking book, if you like, maybe better, called Gossip. So Patricia Meyer-Spaks' book, Gossip. Her distinctions have been an important touchstone for later scholarly work on gossip in the humanities, including Mellencamp's. Moreover, Spaks' delineation of gossip as constituting intimacy and as also functioning as a mode of self-reflection plays an important role in my conceptualization of a gossip of images. Spaks begins her study of gossip and literature by making a distinction between two typical modes of gossip that exist at opposite ends of a continuum: gossip as malice or idle talk, and serious gossip. Gossip as idle talk is the most common. This is an ephemeral oral discourse that emerges primarily in order to pass the time, but which can also be fostered by the desire to thrill to the scandals, intrigues, or misfortunes of others. Although Spaks maintains that the truly malicious form of this gossip, the kind directed at ruining careers and reputations or furthering political goals, is actually quite rare, gossip as thoughtless idle talk nevertheless has problematic ramifications. Like other forms of gossip, it strengthens the bonds between the gossipers through their speculation and evaluation of others who are not present. Unlike other forms, however, idle gossip is often distinguished by what we might term its smug moralism. As Spaks notes, quote, it reveals complacencies of groups in power, groups whose members, when they gather, feel no need to question themselves or their assumptions, end quote. Spaks' second mode of gossip is what she calls serious gossip, which is distinguished from idle gossip by its functional relationship to intimacy, and by the commitments and desires of those who engage in it. Rather than resting in the complacent security of their own standards of behavior, serious gossipers invoke the experience of others in order to test and challenge their own presuppositions, and thereby transform their own sense of the possible. Serious gossip is therefore a valuable tool for those whose sense of possibility is often limited because of social, political, racial, or class position, and/or because of the moralism of others. About serious gossip, Spax writes, its participants use talk about others to reflect about themselves, to express wonder and uncertainty and locate certainties, to enlarge their knowledge of one another. Such gossip, like the other forms, may use the stuff of scandal, but its purposes bear little on the world beyond the talkers, except inasmuch as that world impinges on them. It provides a resource for the subordinated. Anyone can talk. With a trusted listener, anyone can say anything. A crucial means of self-expression, a crucial means of solidarity, end quote. While it may be just as ephemeral, trivial, frivolous, or indiscreet as other forms, serious gossip is distinguished by the commitments and investments of those brought together through gossiping. The evocative details about others are a catalyst for the shared exploration of new possibilities for the gossipers themselves. In this sense, the dubious quality of the information that is passed on is less significant than the intimacy that is fostered through the gossip itself. These two modes, gossip as idle talk and serious gossip, exist along a continuum and are therefore not completely independent from one another. Moreover, since gossip is a fluctuating oral discourse, the process of gossiping often involves a continual negotiation between these extremes of malice and idleness and self-exploration and intimacy. Distinguishing between the two modes should not, therefore, lead us to think that there can be a gossip cleansed of all of its unsavory elements, or on the contrary, that there can be a gossip that doesn't produce some semblance of intimacy among its participants. Thus, although I follow Spax's lead in privileging gossip as a function of intimacy, I by no means intend to strip gossip of its potential malice, idleness, incivility, or shameless indiscretion. Indeed, gossip's naughtiness is one of the things that attracts me, and I would venture many others to it as a practice and object of study. Distinguishing between different modes of gossip, however, can aid in clarifying the social functions of this discourse, whose ubiquity and frivolity might otherwise keep us from analyzing it in greater detail. Furthermore, by emphasizing gossip's social role in fostering intimacy, we may begin to specify its structural and epistemological aspects, which a hasty dismissal on the basis of its thoughtlessness or groundlessness would deem unintelligible. Spax examines the social functions of serious gossip by exploring the historical connection between gossip and women. Although one must note the irony of attempting to pin down the origins of a word that describes a discourse without origin, Spax does remind us that gossip initially meant God's sibling and referred to a godparent of either sex. She argues that in the 17th and 18th century, the word gossip became decidedly associated with the perceived irresponsible behavior of women. And Agnieszka already mentioned Silvia Federici's important work on gossip, which emerged after I had initially started writing about gossip and basing that on Spax. So I've incorporated some of Federici's kind of genealogical and political perspective into this analysis. But sticking with Spax, she quotes Dr. Johnson's definition of gossip from the mid-18th century as follows: one who runs about tattling like women at a lying-in. I love this idea of a lying-in. I think we need to resuscitate that, where we all get together and just whatever a lying-in was, and we lie, we spread lies with one another. I think that's nice. Like there's field tanks and we can have lie tanks. Although the explicit reference to women dropped out of subsequent definitions, the negative association between gossip and the careless behavior of women remained. This is perhaps most notable in the association between perceived female verbal and sexual frivolousness, that is, between loose words and loose living. Like the condemnation of female sexuality and desire, Spax argues, the condemnation of gossip reveals aspects of fear, fascination, and erotic titillation at something hidden, unknown, and uncontrollable. As she explains, gossip, and I quote here, gossip, like sexual intercourse, belongs to a hidden life. Sex and gossip alike comprise modes of intimate communication. Both epitomize the unpredictable and uncontrollable. Like sex, gossip serves impulse and has explosive potential. Passionate attacks on the secret life of words parallel warnings about the secret life of the body, end quote. Gossip thus refers to a dynamic hidden network of meanings and implications, a secret life of words that tantalizes and threatens outsiders while sustaining and nourishing insiders. Indeed, part of gossip's work is to redraw the lines between the outside and the inside, the public and the private, the discrete and the indiscrete. For women and for others who have typically been denied access, access to venues of public expression, gossiping fosters meaningful relationships by which they could test and exchange perspectives on the outside or the official world. A commitment to foster a variety of perspectives through the secret life of words thus distinguishes the serious gossiper from the idle talker. As Spax notes, people in positions of authority don't have the same stakes in gossip, since they have more direct methods of imposing their standards on others. It is for this reason she chooses to focus on gossip as a discourse of the subordinated that, quote, embodies an alternative discourse to that of public life, and a discourse potentially challenging to public assumptions. In sum, gossip, she says, provides a language for an alternative culture, end quote. While highly influential for later scholarship seeking to redeem gossip as a valuable social phenomenon, Spax's study has also been the object of critique, perhaps most notably by Mellencamp. And I should say that Eve Sedgwick, in Epistemology of the Closet, so together with Judith Butler's Gender Trouble, a foundational text for queer studies, Sedgwick I think I first came to Spax through Sedgwick, I must say, that Sedgwick very briefly reflects on gossip as part of her interest in generating taxonomies of difference. And she calls them nonce taxonomies. And she refers to Spax as the instigator for her thinking about this potential of gossip for the subordinated. Let's see, okay, here, I'll just continue though with Mellencamp's critique. Mellencamp, as I mentioned briefly, Mellencamp explores the theoretical, legal, and popular discourses on gossip and uses the term mediated gossip to describe the broad phenomenon of so-called secondhand talk that permeates the mass media, evident not only in the popularity of tabloids and talk shows, as she was writing in the early 90s, but also in the media's general fascination with the sexual or bodily details of public figures. With her analysis, Mellencamp shifts the emphasis from gossip as a productive imaginative discourse, as Spax would have it, to gossip as a mode of consumption and recycling. Quote from Mellencamp, gossip is not so much information that is produced linked to labor or production, but secondhand talk that is consumed, recycled, and refashioned, akin to leisure or reproduction, end quote. We see here where Federici, who I would follow, would argue against that. In its elevation of affect, image, and voyeuristic speculation over authenticity, knowledge, and actual human interaction, mediated gossip is, for Mellencamp, emblematic of a postmodern world. For her, Spack's emphasis on the value of gossip in forging relationships and constructing intimate contexts represents a nostalgic and romantic form of political quietism. According to Mellencamp, to valorize gossip as a function of intimacy for the subordinated is to attempt to pacify women with imaginary pleasures, rather than to incite them to more direct and public forms of political activism. As she writes, quote, "This tactic of valorization called resistance might serve to prevent women from speaking out in public and private directly," end quote. Although Mellencamp justly criticizes Spack's for denying the importance of popular culture, Spack's is writing about the novel, the 19th century novel. So she doesn't really address then popular culture in the 80s when she wrote her book. But nevertheless, she criticized her for denying the importance of popular culture, for problematically emphasizing gossip as a form of subversion, and for relying on a convenient series of binary oppositions, inside, outside, public, private, malice, intimacy, official, unofficial, etc. Mellencamp's own argument about the feminization of mass culture through its permeation by gossip misses an important political point that is actually enabled by Spack's insistence on the productivity of serious gossip. Moreover, Mellencamp's thought process remains marked by an unproductive binarism as well, gossip as consumption versus gossip as production. Isn't gossip, however, both a process of consumption and production? That is a dynamic process of recycling that utilizes details about others for a new kind of imaginative production. What Spack's analysis provides that Mellencamp's forecloses is an understanding of how gossip's recycling and recontextualizing, consumption and production, can be generative not only of new imaginative possibilities, but also of an alternative culture or a counterpublic that fosters such active imagination. That is, praising the imaginative work accomplished by the circulation of gossip does not necessarily mean relegating minoritarian gossips to purely imaginary resistance against conventional or oppressive social structures. Rather, it can allow us to see how a collective process of speculation and imagining could be intricately bound up with the production of new and/or alternative social contexts, however fleeting or provisional, within which new possibilities for the self can be tested out in practice. Furthermore, at certain moments, the secrets that circulate as gossip can also be made public as scandal in order to force the awareness and resolution of problems typically relegated to the realm of the private. And in this respect, there's actually very interesting anthropological work on gossip. I here refer to a study, A Secret History of Gender by Stephen Stern, looking at gender and power relations in late colonial Mexico, where he talks about the networks of ongoing female conversation in the Morelos region in Mexico, in which women would carefully choose when to reveal publicly the secret knowledges that circulated as gossip. In this case, who was sleeping with whom. And this mobilization of gossip as scandal was a way of supporting other women who were suffering at the hands of men in order to force some kind of public resolution of these conflicts that were previously held, or that were previously thought by the men to remain private. So that's one way in which this kind of private-public divide gets called into question, and can strategically be used. We can think also about the practice of outing celebrities that I began with. That was a queer activist practice, which is part of what inspired me to think about this. Taking into account the potential for mobilizing gossip as scandal, Mellencamp would nevertheless counter that the oral discourse's political value remains solely compensatory. As she writes, quote, "Real power comes from speaking about oneself or one's position rather than the positions and behaviors of others. Gossiping is also a way to avoid talking about oneself, to evade affect and emotion. Gossip as a form of displacement, end quote. Inasmuch as gossip is doomed to speak forever in the third person about what he, she, they said or did, its political value, according to Mellencamp, is limited. However, by viewing gossip as a dynamic process of recycling and production, we can acknowledge that gossip does not merely speak in the third person. Indeed, as I mentioned briefly already, and as I argue extensively in my chapter on fabulation, gossip mobilizes the third person to forge a more highly resonant first person and second person plural. This transformative process of mediating between the first and third person takes on particular political value in light of the limited possibilities afforded first person discourse in the public sphere. Social theorists speak of the subjunctive nature of the public sphere. Here, the person where I pulled some of this from is Michael Warner in his book, Publics and Counterpublics, where he critically investigates Habermas's theory of the public sphere from a queer perspective, if you will. And so I say here, social theorists speak of the subjunctive nature of the public sphere so as to explain how, as members of a public, we act as if we are specifically, individually invoked by public discourse and its promises of inclusion, when we know at the same time that such discourse addresses us also as the strangers we were before becoming public. Gossip, I would suggest, counters the public's subjunctive as if with the speculative what if that invokes the stranger or the third person for the purposes of reconstructing subjectivity and collectivity in the context of a counterpublic. And this what if is something that, that I think I'm thinking of with gossip in its speculative, its way of speculating about others. And I link that to another observation by Eve Sedgwick, where Eve Sedgwick talks about camp and the practice of camp. And she has I think a wonderful section where she distinguishes camp recognition from kitsch attribution. And yeah, another binary I'm working with here, but she, this is in Epistemology of the Closet also, and just a few pages where Eve Sedgwick's idea of camp is that this camp re-evaluative engagement with popular culture is a means of saying, what if the person who made this object has the same kinds of perverse affective relationship to the object that I have? And furthermore, what if there are others who, like me, also see this object from a perverse affective, perverse affective perspective? And so that's what Sedgwick, in a very abbreviated, jet-lagged summary, what Sedgwick describes as camp recognition. And so this what if, these series of what if questions that are posed to cultural objects is something that I'm here linking with a fundamental speculative nature of gossip, and thereby trying to think that through as a way of negotiating the as if relationship that one has in the public sphere. So I've staged this confrontation between Spax and Mellencamp, not only because their contributions to thinking about gossip have been fundamental to my own, but also, and I should say here with Mellencamp coming, is really the person in film and media studies in an Anglo-American context who's really written the most extensively about gossip and scandal in relation to television media culture and film culture, and then Spax as this fundamental theorist of gossip from feminist literary studies. So I was bringing the two of them together because I feel that the way in which I'm trying to work out their differences could help make clear some of my central concerns with gossip as a function of intimacy, and with the ramifications of a secret life of words for distinctions between the first and the third person, and between public and counterpublic discourse. Gossip's status as a deformer of words, language, or intentional communication occasions its frequent negative assessment by moralists and scholars. However, by analyzing the ramifications of gossip for language and subjectivity, the ramifications when words enjoy a secret life, I suggest that gossip's significance is as a productive, creative, and daring mode of thought. And I'll just, by way of conclusion, just mention, not really conclusively, but more openly, that what follows this section is where I take as an inspiration a quote by Avital Ronell. What if being were itself a rumor, the murky rumbling of an unheard of ontology? And from there, I look at different philosophical investigations of gossip and rumor, and maybe the kind of clearest connection to this idea of the secret life of words is something that Wittgenstein spoke about, where he talked about the philosophical problems posed when, quote, language goes on holiday. I like this idea of language going on holiday, because language going on holiday, in that sense, for him, it was his concern about when words took time off from the purpose of describing the world or communicating experience to celebrate themselves or to hide away from public view. And phenomena like idle talk, chatter, gossip, and rumor have historically been viewed as some of these examples of when language goes on holiday. And then so I have a little section also where I play around with Heidegger and the kind of complications of his attempt to make a distinction between, in his case, between Gerede and Rede, with Rede being good and Gerede being bad, to make it really crude, this distinction. And then I work from there to Gilles Deleuze, and Gilles Deleuze's, particular Gilles Deleuze's mention of rumor as a fundamental cinematographic object. And that's my departure point for theorizing then gossip as making distinctions between gossip and rumor, but theorizing gossip as a means also of generating images through its social interactions. Which is something that Deleuze speaks about with rumor and cinema. But I think I will stop here, and I hope that I provided enough insight into some of my thinking and organization of this project so that we can have a fruitful discussion. So thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, thank you, Marc. That was so interesting. And thanks a lot for this really rich insight into your practice, into your research, and especially into gossip. Because I very much enjoyed how you opened up like all these theoretical approaches that are actually existing about gossip, which is amazing. And also how you made clear how linguistically connotated the concept itself is. So yeah, that was brilliant. And especially what I was mentioning that earlier already to you, I enjoyed how you had this talk, the gossip of images, not with and not about images, but just without images. And I think that was actually, yeah, a great, a genius stroke, kind of. So I want to open up the discussion before I will talk too much. And we already have 2 remarks in the chat. And I want to encourage you, of course, to ask questions or just tell us what you think, participate in a discussion. You can also, as Marc said, do that in German. Feel free to
Ja, wir können auch gerne meinetwegen einfach ins Deutsch jetzt wechseln für die Diskussion. Vielleicht ist, oder wie ihr wollt.
I have basically no idea what the native language of most participants is. So I will just continue in English, but you can just ask questions in German, and then maybe we can switch and we can just adapt to the situation. And yeah, if you want to ask a question, but you are too shy to speak it out, you can also just write it in the chat and I will read it out. And so that's fine too. And of course, you can just start to speak. I think there won't be such a chaotic situation. Yeah, Ali.
Hello, thank you so much for this presentation. I found it so interesting. And I have a question about intersectionality and gossip. And my question is specifically like about participation, like who can speak, who gets heard, and is there like a border or barrier to gossip, or can just anybody participate?
Thank you for your comments. Excuse me. I think it depends. Maybe I'd ask if you mean, is there a border to gossip about who can participate? Maybe I'll start speaking, but I'm not sure if I'm immediately answering what you're interested in. But then you could correct me. What interests me about gossip is that, in a sense, one can't. I'm thinking more about this small group gossip that one cannot. We don't gossip with just anyone. That's where I would make distinctions between gossip and scandal. And some of the circulation of gossip online is often scandalous, is often intended trolling or trying to flame wars or trying to shame people. That to me is not gossip, that's scandal. Gossip is something that one engages with people that one trusts. It's also something that one engages with people in order to calibrate the trust and intimacy of the relationship, so that one doesn't start gossiping with someone about others unless one feels that one knows this person well enough to that one would share a similar interest in this kind of speculation about the behaviors of others. It can very easily, as maybe some of us have experienced, some of us gossips among us, that one begins gossiping with someone and realizes this was not the right thing I should be saying right now. This person is not someone who appreciates this mode of circulating information or mode of bonding through the speculation about others. So in that sense, I would say that there are certain kind of finely tuned social skills that one learns in order to participate in gossip. But that's more on the maybe individual level. And it seemed that your question was more directed at a kind of public or counter-public level, in which then intersectionality would play a bigger role. But would you like to say something more about that, or in response to what I just said?
I think I was just asking myself, especially if you talk about images and gossip with images, and when we look back in like back in time and history, there was just, I don't know, a lot of whitewashing, for example. And when we talk about race and stuff, and a lot of minority voices just don't get heard. And I was just asking myself that, how is like the access for these people? But you just said, like, if there's this level of intimacy or stuff like that, maybe then there's more like the freedom to talk and to gossip.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Maybe I could just also extend that by reference to some of the examples that I talk about in my book. I write extensively about Vaginal Davis, self-described blacktress, intersexual African-American drag performer and artist, and thinking about Vaginal Davis's basic general mode of production, whether it's in performance, in video work, or in her paintings, that is all about, I think, a kind of necessity, a felt necessity to create a place for her vision of the world that has been denied people of color and transgender people. And so for her, I think gossip becomes a mode of making a world of gender complexity, of racial, of complex racial genealogies, interracial genealogies, intersectional genealogies possible. And we see that to some extent in her paintings, where Vaginal Davis only paints women. They're beautiful. If you don't know her paintings, she's quite known maybe in queer academic studies through the important work of Jose Munoz. And Vaginal Davis is a key figure for Jose Munoz's theorizing of the idea of disidentification, a practice among queer performers of color and artists of color. But Vaginal Davis, for the past 10 years, has maybe predominantly kind of newly established herself internationally as a painter, and where she only paints women, uses the kind of tools of the trade of the drag performer. She paints with nail polish. She finishes her paintings with hairspray. She uses lipstick, and she always gives her paintings. She'll do different themes, where she'll focus on different women in history. Sometimes it will be on Black performers in Hollywood, and she'll do a series of paintings of the Black performers in Hollywood. Or she'll do a series of paintings of, she did one of Black female party hostesses, historical in history. Some of scholars, she has like a nice painting of Paul Preciado, painting of Virginie Despentes, of a variety of people that when you look at the image, maybe you wouldn't necessarily recognize Preciado in this painting, particularly because, well, Preciado, or you wouldn't necessarily recognize Despentes or something, but for Vaginal Davis, I think this is part of her vision of situating the images that she creates in relation to known images of others. At any rate, so Vaginal Davis is one example. I write about the 1960s and the underground film movement, and particularly focusing on Mario Montez, Puerto Rican American drag performer who became quite famous, was the kind of big drag performer of the 1960s underground film scene, in films by Andy Warhol and Jack Smith, and in theater. And I discuss his relationship, and Mario always preferred to use the male pronoun even as in his appearance, presenting female. But so I follow his example there. But so Mario, in his identification with Maria Montez, an actress from the Dominican Republic who became very famous in 1940s Hollywood Orientalist and racist films. And Mario, perhaps in a certain act of disidentification with Hollywood racism took on, and strong identification with Maria Montez took on her identity for his performances in these films. So I reflect on that. So those are maybe, and also I write just briefly about Xiao Dunye's The Watermelon Woman, a work that has been written about so often that we don't need to hear me about it, but I just try to pull out some of the ways in which that film is such a wonderful example of gossip in action, and gossip as a means of writing a history of, in this case, Black lesbians who have been written out of film history, since that's a film, for those who don't know it, in which Xiao Dunye plays a character named Cheryl, who works in a video store and is researching the history of a character actress in early race films in the United States, namely the character a woman who only goes by the name, or is credited as the Watermelon Woman, and plays the racist roles of a mammy or a maid. And Cheryl in the film's task is to try to find out more about this woman's life, who was the woman behind this racist stereotype. And she discovers a whole world of Black lesbians, and that helps her to secure her own sense of identity. So for me, that's a wonderful example of this way that she finds out this history mainly through discussions with others, puts it together through the intimate exchanges, through gossip, if you will, and then is able to present her history of the Watermelon Woman. So those are some examples where I would just maybe emphasize, I emphasize in my work, but also emphasize for your question, Ali, that intersectionality does play, I think, an important role in gossip, in the sense that often the people for whom, maybe people who have a greater investment in gossip are often people who have less access to the dominant modes of circulating their perspectives about themselves and the world. And therefore, it's important to think through questions of racialization, of gender and sexual discrimination, of class discrimination. We can't forget the role of, I think Eve Sedgwick mentions this, the role of servants, of maids, of workers as important gossips, and gossips about their employers. And that's also a very important historical set for gossip. So I think that an intersectional analysis is necessary for thinking through the historical, political, and theoretical possibilities of gossip. That was a very long response. Excuse me.
No, thank you so much. I really can't wait to read your book now. So it was a really good review.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, Sema.
Hello, Sema.
Hey. Hi, Marc. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, because my connection is not so good, so I will keep off my camera. So thanks, first of all. It was so interesting to know more about your book, finally. And I have like two small questions. I actually just want to know what you think about, for example, of the notion of secrecy, because when we talk about gossip, and I mean, you talk at the beginning, like you tell a friend that this person had sex with someone else, and she tells someone else, she or he, and there's always this wish that it's kept secret, like don't tell anyone. But at the end, gossip, it does the other thing. I mean, it does the opposite. It circulates, and I mean, circulation is actually that what is not wanted, like the opposite goal of keeping it secret and telling, don't tell anybody, but maybe this wish, like, don't tell anybody, means go tell everybody. I don't know. And yeah, what you think about secrecy of gossip, and also like you talked just right now, that you don't gossip with anyone. You gossip with people you trust. And what does that mean when people you trust actually don't keep the secret? So that's the first question. And the second one is, when you talk about this two versions of gossip, like the idle talk gossip and the serious gossip. And to me, it seems like kind of a paradox to talk about gossip, like serious gossip. And I mean, for me, isn't it exactly the exciting thing that gossip is not serious, and that it doesn't have this claim of seriousness, that makes gossip a different kind of discourse than all the other serious ones.
Yeah. Thank you, Thema. That's super relevant question. Maybe I'll just start with the second one. I completely agree. I've always been very hesitant about just furthering this distinction that Spax makes between gossip is idle talk and gossip is serious gossip. For those reasons, I think what I need to make clear is that, and I don't work with this concept of serious gossip in any other place in the manuscript. It's only in my Auseinandersetzung with Spax. But I think I just should make clear maybe the historical context of Spax's work, since it was written in the early 80s, and I think it was from her a felt necessity to just get literary scholars to recognize that there is something serious about this discourse, and therefore she tries to kind of tease out these different modes of gossip. But I agree that, and I agree with her that there is something serious, but I feel that since in the almost 40 years since then, there's been a body of scholarship in Black studies and queer studies, feminist studies that have really shown us, without having to argue, without having to prove it anymore, that this is a serious discourse. We don't need to make that argument anymore. What I would also then to the first point about secrecy, I think that's it's such a fascinating, that's like a paradox about gossip, is that, and I think of there's a quote from Deleuze and Felix Guattari that I use, where they say that the secret secretes, and secrete, like, and so it like oozes and flows, and that's something that they kind of conceive as part of a secret. I find that's I wonder if indeed we're always upset with that trusted friend when they pass on the gossip. Or if there's something, or if there's sometimes I know where I've gossiped and I've intentionally gossiped. I mean, I guess maybe there's another realm of information that we don't, that you do share with people that is not gossip, but is still sharing confidential, important information. I think there is that, but I think that gossip has this kind of duality of both being something that we confide in someone, and only in this person or in this context, or it's one or two other people, but we are aware that it could, maybe not in the moment when we confide it, but generally we're aware of the fact that gossip may indeed be passed on. And so our choices about confiding, about which information to confide, are motivated by this understanding of how gossip functions. And I'm intrigued with this, with the seeming contradiction that you've pointed out. about the secret that nevertheless secretes out of the context in which it's been confided.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Sima.
Does anyone else have a question or a comment? Because I actually do. So that's great. And we were already talking a bit about, or you were actually mentioning about that online gossip is rather a scandal, and it's not how you understand gossip as like. Also, this is what you were saying right now, as more like an intimate bond, kind of, and like a matter, or like a proof of trust, and. I'm just wondering, or I'm curious how you would relate that to social media, because I think lots of things change right now when it comes to gossip, because also thinking of the gossip of images that also on social media works differently than when you talk about Hollywood stars in the 80s. Just when I think of, for example, memes are images, and I it's more like responding to an image that is the actual gossip then, because it's like you have an image of, I don't know, Donald Trump, and you make a meme out of him, and this is already like, it is still his image, but it's not his image, it's a meme, and this is like passing on and so on and so forth. And, and also it matters where this image comes from, but on the other hand, it kind of dissolves. And so I think, again, it is a matter of trust, but it's kind of an exposed trust, right? So the image comes back in again, but more like in this way of how you actually visualize or expose something. So yeah, this is, I'm kind of just curious what you would about gossip in social media, coming from come from.
No, thank you, Agnieszka. I mean, I have to lay all my cards on the table here and say that this project is a project I started, dare I say, in the 90s. As that's when I started thinking about gossip, and it was my PhD dissertation, which I started in the late 90s and only finished about like 11 years ago. So it took me quite some time. I was doing lots of other things. And then now I've been taking more time on the book manuscript. So when I first started thinking about this, social media didn't exist. The digital, web 2.0 didn't exist. But of course, I'm still alive and working and thinking about the contemporary phenomenon and working that into my thinking about gossip. I just would ask, I wonder, I still somehow hope that the structure, the way I'm describing gossip as a structural, as a logic of thought, a creative logic of thought, a speculative logic of thought, that can still help us to describe and to make some distinctions that could be productive in thinking about, let's say, memes. And I would just wonder, maybe ask back to you, because I know you've written about this and thought a lot about this, is in like maybe the borders, when does gossip become rumor? And gossip typically has to do with people and their goings on. Gossip is usually, I would say, tied to a communication context. So one knows who one heard the gossip from. It's important who one heard it from, and that, as I mentioned earlier, circulates with the gossip. That's one way of kind of grounding the gossip. Whereas rumors circulate. I think rumors tend. That's part of the reason why I think some like deconstructionist theorists, Derrida, Deleuze, or post-structuralists tend to privilege rumor over gossip, because rumor to them, I think, is a more fascinating discourse, and gossip is more tied up in individuals and in human interaction. And I just wonder then, I wonder, can it be that, I mean, if you, like a meme is something that is not, does not remain tied to the person who made the meme. I think it does circulate freely. So and independently of particular contexts, and that's almost definitional for a meme. And it seems to me that that would not, in that sense, be the same. Its circulation, it does not circulate in the same way that gossip does, it seems to me, but more perhaps in the way rumor does. Does that distinction seem productive for you in this context?
Yeah, actually, it's extremely productive. So I'm really thankful for that, because I think that gossip is a concept or an activity, or as you said, like a noun and a verb that that online is very much capitalized upon, you know, because it's actually symbolic or social or whatever capital to show that you know something about, or that you are intimate with someone. When I tag you in my picture, you know, that's gives me more likes, kind of. And so I think rumor, as you said, is maybe the better term to describe this circulation that actually cannot be framed, kind of, that not can be like pointed down. Yeah. Ulrike wants to say something.
I have two questions. And one is just, I would love to know the author of this beautiful sentence. What if being were itself a rumor? What if being itself were a rumor? I didn't get the author. Could you please repeat it?
Yes, it's, I could even write her name in the chat. It's Avito Renel, and the essay is called Street Talk.
Okay.
And, I think I spelled her last name wrong. I think it's
I'll find
like
her.
that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That was my first question. And my second question is, where do the images come in? I mean, you call it gossip of images, as far as I saw, but your concept of gossip and also what you refer to is very language-based, very text-based. And images have different qualities because they make, I mean, you work on moving images. I usually work on non-moving images, but images do things that text or that stop texts as that sort of take layers away. And what you're talking about is layers that sort of combine the social and the textual or the rational or whatever, or the language. But what happens when the image comes in? Because your examples were all of films where there was gossip in the films. The gossip was part of the content of your examples. But why then do you call it gossip of images and not in images? Or I mean, where does the image stand?
Yeah. No, thank you, Ulrike. Sorry, I've now geduzt. Aber yeah, I think it's something. One of the other, or maybe first, the example, definitely the example of maybe the watermelon woman is an example where it's kind of gossip is the content, the kind of thinking about the drag persona and performances of Mario Montez as a mode of gossip is a different way of engaging with the visual and with drag performance as a means of recirculation, production of new images. And that's something that I then pursue in my work on Vaginal Davis, although with Vaginal Davis, I do both things, where I take some examples from performances where she's read texts that are indeed textual examples of gossip. Gossip is the content, but then also her paintings, where I feel that the relationship between the images and the references functions as a form of gossip. And that's something I look at also in the work of Andy Warhol, for instance, of some of his films. I do a longer analysis of a film of his called Harlot, that's kind of circulating around the image of Jean Harlow, the actress, and Mario Montez plays Jean Harlow. And Jean Harlow was known as the kind of image of white female early century neuroses, if you will, and to have this Puerto Rican drag performer embody her is something that I think through what that's doing. But maybe I'll give a different example, which is was also a kind of fundamental example for me in starting to think about gossip as a means of circulating images, and that's a film by the German artist and filmmaker Matthias Müller, who teaches at the KHM in Köln, and is a very known found footage filmmaker. So someone who works with pre-existing material. And there's a film that Matthias Müller did in 1990 called Home Stories, which is maybe 6-minute film that consists solely of images that he took from Hollywood melodramas of the 40s and 50s that he filmed off his television set. And he edited that film in such a fascinating way so that the focus is on women in melodramas and, in a sense, in the kind of oppressive environment of the home, of the domestic space, and of the limited gestures and expressive possibilities for the female actresses in these films. And he edited it together in such a way that the women from all of these different films come together in his film and seem to turn to one another in order to tackle the oppressive, threatening environment that surrounds them. So Matthias Müller's film is often read as a deconstruction of Hollywood melodramas, and I could see that, but I think what I'm arguing, maybe this is sort of an argument with, or gossip is like my take on gossip is challenging some ideas of deconstruction, if you will, but that's a separate thing. But I'm saying that I think it functions, this film functions as a kind of gossip where the spectators of the film are wondering about the relationship between the filmmaker and these images that the filmmaker has created and has edited in this way. That there's a speculative relationship that emerges as the spectatorial relationship. And this is something that I describe, and I actually begin the book with this example because I wanted to foreground an example where there's no gossip in the film, where someone is not gossiping, where it's not the content, but instead the structure of this montage is such that the evocative, undefinable, indescribable, or let's say the ephemerality of the image is something that seems to be shaped and focused in such a way as to solicit a gossiping spectatorial relationship. And this is something that I describe. It's not for everyone, not everyone who sees that, but in that sense, that's how gossip functions. We don't just gossip with everyone, but the film does solicit some spectators to ask these kind of what if questions about the relationship between the maker and the object or the film. And that's something that I've experienced firsthand when I saw this film. I've seen the film in a lot of different contexts, but when I saw it at a public screening event hosted by the Queer Film Festival in San Francisco, this was in the early 90s, and that was it was shown in the North Beach section of San Francisco, which was which was not a gay or queer section of the city, but it was a public park where Frameline, the Queer Film Festival, had this outdoor public screening. And most of the films were kind of explicitly, films that one would call like explicitly gay or lesbian or trans films. But then this weird experimental film came where it's just these Hollywood images, and the audience, which was predominantly queer, just started totally laughing, this kind of knowing laughter, this kind of identification with the female characters, but also this identification, I think, with someone who would be, with a filmmaker who would be in the late 80s and 90s, focusing so intently on the oppression of the domestic space. We knew the person's name, Matthias Müller, but I didn't know anything about him. And so at a time where AIDS was devastating, San Francisco devastating the queer communities, to somehow see these women trying to struggle with the kind of the fearful outside and trying to navigate their space in the inside. We don't see any men in the film, it's just focusing on the women. That seemed to resonate with a lot of spectators there. But then when I've seen the film in experimental film context, where it's predominantly a straight audience, if you will, people don't laugh. and people don't have that kind of emotionally intense laughter of recognition. They situate maybe the film in a different historical context of found footage filmmaking and appropriation, where it rightfully belongs. But I found that this other mode of engagement with the film is that I would describe as a gossip relationship, is something that the film itself solicits. But in that sense, it depends on a particular context. So I hope that somehow explains. So I try in the work to be very attentive to the evocative aspects of the image. And maybe if I can give one other example really quick, Rock Hudson's Home Movies, a found footage film by Marc Rappaport, is a film from the mid-90s that is a kind of reflection on Rock Hudson, the Hollywood star who died of AIDS. And when he came out as having AIDS, just I think a few months before he died, that was the first time that the public found out that he was indeed gay. Whereas queer counterpublics knew he was gay for a long time through the circulation of gossip, but the public didn't know until this moment, and that threw into question their image of kind of straight macho heterosexual masculinity, which was the image that Rock Hudson represented back in his heyday of the 50s, his films with Douglas Sirk, for instance. But then this film that Marc Rappaport made, he's attempting to look back to Rock Hudson's images and find clues to his homosexuality in the images. And for me, I think that the film is super interesting and important, Marc Rappaport's film, but nevertheless, it seems to me in a certain sense more gay than queer, if you will. It tries to nail down the images to provide the kind of empirical knowledge of his gayness, rather than be open to the evocative, indescribable, ephemeral aspects of the image that suggest something about sexuality, but do not pin it down. And that's where I would go into the queer aspect, and that's where I think gossip, how gossip functions, because gossip cannot provide us with certainty. It solicits our belief in possibilities. Okay, I hope that gives some sense of my interest in the image. But thank you for the question.
Okay, I love how the few images that I actually see are getting darker and darker. So that is actually evidence, I would say, that it's getting late. So has someone else like a last question? No. So then I would say we are all on the imaginary shopping list for Marc's book. And we are
sweet.
really, I'm definitely looking forward to that. So that was amazing, Marc. Thanks a lot. It was so insightful and enriching, and especially not only like for this little circle now, but also for me and for the foundation for the whole program that we have this year. It was really, really great. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you to everyone who participated in the discussion, or your comments. That's
what I wanted to say, of course. We hope to see you maybe also in real life. We have an upcoming exhibition that's opening on the 25th. So yeah, join the program, and we are happy that you made it tonight and that you were sticking with us so long. Thank you. And thank you, Marc.
My pleasure. Thank you, everyone, and have a good evening, Agnieszka. Bye-bye.